personally feel really lucky to be working and talking with Reid today. It's not every day that you get to work with somebody who has had such an impact on so many organizations. And I got to say, I'm a bit of a fanboy. One of the companies that Reid formerly worked with, maybe you should tell us about it, BetterWorks, Reid, and who is notoriously behind that organization as an investor.
Yeah. And Tom, I'm excited to chat with you today too. At BetterWorks, John Doerr, who's famous as bringing OKRs to Google and really popularizing them and then writing this huge hit book, Measure What Matters. He was a backer at BetterWorks. And as I came into learning about OKRs and developing the practice, I worked under his guidance and had the opportunity to travel around with him as he was spreading the word of OKRs. Yeah, have that in my background as long as the hands-on experience with hundreds of companies.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's again, total fanboy. I'm a huge fan of the framework and like the platform, but also of John's. His TED Talk really inspired me probably 10 years ago to help implement OKRs in my past life. And that's what, of course, inspired us to bring it to Parallax to help us operate our company. And yeah, I think that I work with all kinds of different digital agencies, digital software companies, that sort of thing every day. And I see a lot of organizations using frameworks like Traction or EOS, people refer to it as. And OKRs, I don't think are as popular in the digital agency world yet. And I wonder if that might be just because they haven't found them yet. So I think what we're going to try to cover today is first starting with just a kind of state of the industry. I'm going to give you some perspective that I've had over the last 6 months or so as I, again, work with dozens of different digital service companies and what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. And then I'm going to hand it over to Reid. He's going to talk about just generally what are OKRs and why are they important. And we'll give you guys a few examples of how you might leverage OKRs in a digital services company, along with showing you like what the difference is between industry standard KPIs and then how you might leverage OKRs to influence those KPIs. And then finally, Reid's going to give us just a table stakes story on like how you would start implementing OKRs in your organization. And as Miranda pointed out, we have the Q&A open right now. We'll try to keep an eye on it. And if there's stuff that's relevant and we can weave in, we'll weave it into our conversation. If not, we're saving some time at the end so that we can do more of a live Q&A and address all of the open questions. What did I miss, Reid? Anything?
Sounds good. Let's go.
Cool. We'll kick it off here and this state of the industry. And I think that honestly, I think digital is in a state of flux. On one hand, it's awesome. Like the kind of innovation, the new methodologies and tools, the opportunity in front of us is absolutely incredible. But it's different. It's a lot different than it was 2 years ago. I think first things first, we used to say that kind of sales came easy. There was such high demand for our work that if you have a few good relationships, they'll spawn other great relationships from word of mouth, and growth is really organic. And I think that people are realizing, especially over the last 2 years, that the buyer has changed. The economy is different, and you have to be more strategic and more consistent in the way that you go after new relationships and grow and expand existing relationships. And so that is leading to the really a tough spot for founders and operators who've always done it this way. I talked to an agency operator owner just on Monday, and he'd been running this business for 10 years, and he was very successful. In fact, around COVID, he had worked himself out of a job. He was almost semi-retired operating this business, and he had consistent revenue coming in. He was profitable. People were happy, high retention of customers and employees. But over the last 3 years, the consistency in the revenue had just become a lot more variable, a lot less predictable. And he was looking for a lot of reasons why. And he found himself in a situation where instead of that semi-retired feel of a CEO founder, he realized he had to get back in the game and figure out how to pull up those entrepreneurial bootstraps. And he was lamenting how hard that was. And at the same time, again, like there are all kinds of new capabilities that people are building, all kinds of new methods and tools. And the way that we're selling our services, the way that we're aligning our teams needs to change. We need to get more out of less. We need to get more revenue out of fewer people. We need to have higher utilization, higher revenue per billable employee. And we got to be strategic about this. It's about not just how we sell and how we deliver the work, but how we forecast, how we plan, and how we align what's coming in from the funnel through what's being delivered. And I think overall, one of the biggest shifts that you're going to need to make that organizations, in my opinion, need to make today are moving from that like reactive mode to more of a strategic mode. Again, when we founded these companies, maybe even for the last 10 years prior to COVID, it felt we could do anything possible just to keep up with that demand. Like this word of mouth or relationships that grew relationships kept us as busy as we possibly could be, but that's become less consistent. And we have to take more of a leadership role in both getting new relationships, but then growing those existing accounts and guiding those customers on what to do. So that's how I see the industry. More thing that, again, really supports what I believe is the right way to run a business like this is that there are some statistics that say 80% of all digital service businesses are struggling to grow and operate efficiently. And that is because they lack the foresight they need to make decisions strategically related to supply and demand. It always feels like we have too much work and not enough people, but then all of a sudden next week, we've run out of work and we have too many people. And that sine wave can go up and down on a moment's notice. But I think what people don't understand, it's their own habits and behaviors that make that sine wave the way it is. When we find ourselves in a position where we have too much work and not enough people to do it, we're focused all of our energy and our time on trying to get that work done, whether that's actually doing the work ourselves or if that's finding new people to do the work. But before we know it, we hadn't focused on that new business thing and we end up on the other end of the sine wave where we have too many people and not enough work. And then we're like, crap, here we are again. Let's go shake the tree and try to find more work before we end up at the top again. And again, it's that focus, it's the habits or lack thereof on consistent focus for new business and delivery and balancing those two things. And that's where OKRs come in. I think that creating those habits, those behaviors, that consistent effort is something that's going to need to change in many of the organizations that I speak to. Some more statistics, and I'll thank Nick over at Promethean for this. 54% of the companies that Nick surveyed in his recent report, you can find that on his website or on Bureau of Digital's website, but 54% of those companies, there's 54% new growth in the digital agency landscape. There's that many more new companies every year. And for most organizations, their cost of services or cost of goods sold is going up. That means that in order to keep up with inflation and in order to keep up in this competitive market for this high value talent, that we're paying people a lot more to do the similar or same work, that we're not raising our prices fast enough. So that increase in cost of goods sold or increase of services, that cost of services, that's really hurting. And as a result of these things, there's a change in net income that's significant. It's really hard to be profitable. And that's why people that I'm talking to today that have been in profitable business for 15 years are starting to ask themselves, what am I going to do? Should I shut the doors? 6, 7, 8 million in revenue and cash flow and profitability is not there. So what do you do? How do you break free from that? Just being really good at your craft, just having these relationships and this reputation is not enough. And some of the statistics of the KPIs that you're going to feel, that people are feeling inside the organization and what that means for your business. When utilization goes down for a company of 50 people, that's about $8K annually. When we have lower project margin for this organization the same size, it's over $500,000 of essentially gross margin annually. And that falls to the bottom line. And honestly, I think a lot of the organizations that we talk to, they're trying to keep up with the demand for talent and, again, state of inflation and that sort of thing. They are promoting and giving raises to their employees, not growing their team. And so you end up with an unbalanced talent pool where the overall revenue per billable employee is getting too low compared to what your costs are. All of these things end up feeling like, again, unpredictable revenue, margin compression, and employee burnout. We're trying to push that smaller team to do more. They're fragmented across too many things, and people are feeling like they're burning out, even though our utilization is low. I don't know. I'll move on to the introduction to OKRs. Any comments or thoughts, Reid, on how the industry is feeling right now? And again, maybe relative to the habits and behaviors that we're trying to change?
Yeah, I've helped organizations of many different industries implement OKRs, and they often come to needing a new system like OKRs because they're in a state of flux. Either their industry is in a state of flux or their organization specifically. And I like that you kept coming back to the word habits, right? It's about creating habits, about creating muscle so that you can become an organization that gets good at strategy execution. And that we'll talk all about it. That's the promise of OKRs. But as opposed to, are we good at just setting up metrics that we need to track over time? And that's how we think about goals. That's one category of goal setting. Hopefully we can talk more and more about how OKRs are a really great way to transform how you communicate and how you steer your ship towards big changes, big strategic changes in a short amount of time. So if you have questions as we go through this, and we can hold these till the end, we can talk about why OKRs really differ from other like traditional goal setting methods too. Awesome. Before we dive in, I like to zoom out and give like a little bit of the high level where to come from in giving the definition. I think it helps explain why there was a need at Intel decades ago to have a new goal setting system and why it was transformational with Google and a lot of companies in the last 25 years. So if I were to simplify the definition, one I like is it's simply a company process for goal setting, review, and evaluation that emphasizes frequency and transparency. OKR programs can differ from company to company, but if it lacks an element of frequency in regards to alignment, check-ins, and evaluations, and it's not a process that's transparent, that everyone across an organization has a part of and can see into, I'd argue that it really is something called OKRs. So those are two hallmarks of a program. The previous slide showed a bit of a timeline. Andy Grove, famously, he's a famous manager and executive from Intel back in the day. And he came up with the system of OKRs because he inherited a goal setting process, which was annual in nature and top down in nature. And the big innovation with OKRs, if I were to summarize it as two things, was that it became a more frequent goal setting process. We went from a year to quarterly. There's no way we're steering the ship where it needs to go in a changing environment unless we're deliberate about goals on a quarterly or even more frequent basis. And he didn't like the process where everyone was assigned goals from above. He thought the smartest people in his org were just hired out of engineering school, and he wanted them part of the process, part of the conversation. And so it's really a bi-directional collaborative goal setting system. And then John Doerr, again, famous for bringing it to Google and really proselytizing and writing the book, which has so many organizations who have been excited and successful implementing OKRs. If we jump to the next two slides, let's see. So the one after this, Tom.
Okay.
I want to call out two numbers that I think will hammer home how OKRs might differ a bit and how they're powerful. In a Gallup survey from this year, just looking at US worker engagement, the responses showed that only 30% of employees are engaged at work. So on the flip side, 70% classified as not engaged. And this is a trend that's dropping, right? So workers not engaged, not connected to a company and a strategic mission, a dire signal for whether or not that organization can accomplish great strategic things. Another stat from an HBR study looking at employee engagement was that only 17% of employees surveyed rated that they strongly agree their company has open communication. So I bring this up because I see these as really big signals that organizations need something like OKRs, where you need a goal setting system where it tackles the problems of employee engagement through an avenue of better and more open communication. We'll talk about how that works, but that's an area where it's different. It's really about great habits, about how you set, review, and evaluate OKRs, which then drives these greater impacts to engagement and then strategy execution.
It's so interesting, this lens to look at this opportunity through, in my opinion. It's starting with what Andy Grove said, that some of the most strategic and smartest people were at the front line, the people that hired right out of engineering school that weren't necessarily in management or leadership roles. And it reminds me of what Steve Jobs said: we don't hire smart people to tell them what to do, we hire them so they can tell us what to do. And then to the statistic of like communication, the way I connect the dots on that is you got these smart people who are closer to the front line, and they have a perspective that we might not have as leaders, right? They might see something that we don't see. And with a lack of communication on what the leadership team thinks is most important, with where the opportunities those people at the front line see from their perspective, I can easily understand why people feel disengaged. Like, why am I doing this when we could be doing this? How do you think that, I guess maybe the softball question is, how do you use OKRs to improve that communication response on your annual engagement survey? And what ultimately does the business get out of that?
Yeah, a big thing is that the problem why communication is so hard at organizations is people overestimate how good they are at it. So I think a lot of executives sit around and they finish their weekly or biweekly meeting and they're crystal clear on what needs to happen. And 3/4 of them go back and in their departmental meetings give either a completely different message or forget to relay like the most important moment from that meeting. So there's a bit of that where there's an assumption of agreement, illusion of agreement, right? So when it comes to communication, good communication is actually simple. It's just not easy. It's about common language and consistency and reputation. With OKRs as a system of goal setting, those milestones and rituals that are encouraged that happen frequently quarter over quarter are a way to make sure that that idea that was crystal clear in the board meeting is also crystal clear at every like team by team meeting. It's just like a way to really get focused on ideas and then spread them well.
I love it.
Awesome. Let's talk a bit more about just definitional stuff with OKRs, and we'll get into more about how to make them successful. The acronym I've been throwing around, OKR, obviously stands for objective and key result. That's describing how a specific goal is written. So the idea is you start writing goals where there is a clear objective, which is usually an inspirational statement that describes a desired future state. And that objective is paired with 2 to 4 key results, which are really hard measures, specific measures that will show whether or not we can mark this a success upon completion. And let me just mute my...
You're a popular dude. That's cool, man. We like that.
I think there's a birthday in the friend group here.
Let's go.
All right. Happy birthday. The objective is paired with 2 to 4 key results. And the power of this is you could imagine if all your goals across your organization just looked like key results here. In this example, it's increased CSAT from 85% to 95%. Okay, great. I'm clear on what success looks like, but I don't have necessarily a clear answer of why that's our focus as an organization above everything else right now, right? I'm being told to, but not sure the why behind it. And if I'm on a team that's not directly speaking to customers every day, maybe it's harder for me to figure out what I can do to move everything in the right direction. On the flip side, if all your goals just look like the objective, transform our customers into advocates, I might be excited about it, but I don't have too much guidance on what are the hard metrics that need to move for our success. So you pair the both of them and you have a more holistic, complete, something to work off of as an organization that allows different departments and different individuals to be creative and contribute to that goal. Now, I show this little image of the dashboard here too, because Tom and I were talking in preparation for this. What's the difference between the KPIs that leaders should be tracking all the time in the business and OKRs? And it comes back to that idea of how do we shift strategy quickly as times are changing? If you were to just communicate every important business metric to everybody in the business at all times, it's a ton of information. Some people will find it important. It might just wash over others. The way you move and you change direction is you bring some of those KPIs into focus based on the objectives that you're prioritizing for that quarter or that goal cycle. Hey, if it's crucial, we need to address margin compression, Tom, like you were talking about this quarter. Let's bring that idea into our objective and highlight that KPI, which we track at all times, but really bring it to that level of top company OKR.
I love that. I think, and especially as a metaphor with the dashboard being something different. I think that the first time I tried to implement OKRs probably 10 years ago, we made the mistake of thinking that absolutely everything that anyone did should be tracked. And maybe you could explain why that's probably a recipe for disaster or how it's not effective. And
back to the communication problem, I think we all just have such limited bandwidth. You can be told 100 things are important, but really when you say everything is important, then nothing is, because nothing's right. And so the hardest thing when I go and I work with executives and we say, we have to communicate OKRs for this coming quarter or coming year. And then I say, we can only pick 3, right? That some people get really stressed by that. Naturally, if you want any ideas to stick and really rally the organization, you have to limit the number. It's just a bandwidth problem we have.
That's great. I love it. And do you have any examples or ideas or techniques to help the team understand the difference between maybe this KR that we're pushing for and still the daily responsibilities of their role and you know, how to think about that KR versus things that are, again, more table stakes for their role and their daily responsibility?
For sure. Yeah. I think oftentimes when you have your actual performance review, that's very much rooted in your job description and levels you're working towards. And honestly, most people, they are pretty ingrained on what are my day-to-day responsibilities in my role without having to be reminded of it all the time. Like the example is you wouldn't need a key result telling you to respond to your emails every day. Like that's ingrained that you have to be responsive in your role. It's more like what at the team level is so important. We need to actually review it every time we meet. And it's going to be something that's usually above your day-to-day role. Maybe it's like a strategic shift. But again, going back to that idea that like KPIs can be pulled into your OKRs if they're important for that quarter. If you're having trouble with consistency in your role, like your whole team with consistent delivery, maybe that is like a job description level event that has become an OKR for the quarter because it's so important.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, I think when we were reviewing this, you asked me to put together a quick example on that project margin or margin compression thing. So I did my best here. Again, this is like a hypothetical. Imagine that a digital services company around 50 people, they're starting to feel that margin compression. Again, the cost of their people is going up and they're struggling to get more revenue to match the growth in their expenses. And so where does all that go? It goes to the bottom line or that margin. And so if I were going to write an OKR for that, I'd want to be a little bit inspirational on the objective side, like something that we could, like you said, rally behind and help the team understand why it's important. So I wrote this one. You can give me real-time feedback because we didn't review this yesterday, but I thought maybe we should unleash our full potential by mastering project margin and utilization. Cost of services, gross margin, it's made up of both. And so as you said, I guess in this hypothetical, this would be a company who hasn't really started OKRs yet. This is maybe their first go at it. And so we are simplifying our key results to be, in one case, focused, on two sides, a little bit focused on an actual KPI and improving it, but also just creating new habits. And on the margin side, I thought a really good for one quarter key result is just set targets for project margin for every service offering in the portfolio. A lot of organizations I know, they don't say, hey, for a web development build, we should have X margin, or a SEM engagement, we should have Y margin. Just setting targets alone, I think, would be a great KR. And similarly, setting billable utilization targets for people's roles or roles or capabilities, just again, setting those targets. I think that exercise of doing it would be really good. And then if you're not doing it already, do a biweekly margin review, looking for projects or programs that are performing under that margin expectation we set and seeing if we can address it. And again, simply every week in your resource planning meeting, start to talk about a forecast for utilization, not just what is it this week and next week, what is it out 12 weeks. I think just building these new habits would be a great first step to improving your project margin and your utilization, which would eventually start to address that margin compression issue.
Totally. Yeah, no, I think this is well thought out and a good template for everyone on the call. Just like zeroing in for feedback on the objective, something I like, and you said, try to make this inspirational. I think it does matter the language you chose here. Unleash our full potential is a lot better way than just saying squeeze everything out of the last drop of juice out of everybody. Because if people are feeling squeezed, you can present it as, hey, I understand people are feeling squeezed, but we can do some simple things where there's just a lot of untapped like resources here. Unleash our full potential, right? So just phrasing it differently helps people approach the initiative with such a different mindset. And then your key results are good and you're spot on. When you're at the start of this habit, not something you're used to, having those outcome key results is super important. Hey, did we move the needle on the business? We do need some measure of that, but also we're just getting started. Let's just track the habits we're building, those project-based key results, I call them. Just let's have that meeting. Let's set these targets and show consistency because we'll see the fruits of it down the line.
Love it. Yeah. And I've had lots of conversations with my teams over the years about things that we're trying to change that on the surface might be more like business metric oriented. Like again, margin compression. I've had a lot of luck channeling my inner, like It's a Wonderful Life. If you remember that movie,
yeah,
your money's in Joe's house and John's barn. helping the people in the team understand that if we can improve we can unleash our full potential, if we can improve our margin at our utilization, that's what helps us give you raises. That's what helps us find opportunity for your promotion. That's what helps us take on bigger, more challenging work and all these things. And so again, I think it's really important that you do try to help people understand why with that objective. And then to your point, like we can always become more strategic on these key results once we get these habits in place. So that's how I thought. I really appreciate the feedback. And then, oops, I got to go back to you, I think is the next slide. Where'd it go? Boom. Nope. There we go.
There we go.
All right.
Awesome. And yeah, one quick note on that, Tom, too. I always say there's no such thing as a perfect OKR. So you did a great job following a lot of the guidelines I would give for how to write a powerful one. But people falling in love with the idea of perfect, creating the best OKR imaginable, you know what? That can actually hurt you in the long run. It's way better to just communicate something important and then allow it to be an artifact that creates good communication on your team.
Love that. Love that.
So in this section, I want to talk about the power of focus and alignment, which I think are probably the two greatest strengths of an OKR system well implemented in an organization. There are more strengths, and I'll talk about how you can develop those with an OKR process. But with focus and alignment, I'll I'll show the next slide, which is John Doerr talks about quite often the OKR facts as the superpowers of OKRs. They can give your organization these superpowers once you do them well. They're not something you get day one, but over time, as you get good at it, you can expect to see these outcomes. And those are the facts in focus, alignment, commitment, tracking, and stretching. Now, I show this to an organization that's starting their journey on implementing OKRs, and I say, which are the two most important to you? And it's a good discussion starter because sometimes there's disagreement in the room, but 95% of the time, the top two are focus and alignment. So getting back to our earliest conversation today, it's just, is everyone focused on the right thing that's strategic right now? And are we moving? Are we aligned? Are we all taking action and rowing in the same direction? Now, I do want to call out that some organizations are really drawn to stretch with OKRs. So a lot of the stories from Google are like an OKR achieved at about 60, 70% is a wild success. And actually you're looked at with a side eye if you're hitting 100% of your OKRs because you're supposed to be setting these really huge targets. And for some organizations, setting moonshots and getting better at that is where they want to start. Like that's the cultural change they want to create. But a lot of times starting simply has the biggest impacts, focus and alignment. If you jump to the next slide, some of the core elements of the OKR process that drive each of these superpowers. And if you go to the next slide, Tom, I have a couple bullet points, but the way that you engineer these is, well, we talked a bit about this. If you can only pick about 3 or 4 OKRs at your executive level and then maybe at your department level per department, you are creating a constraint which drives focus. You can only really look at those 3 things. And that's what's important above all else. Alignment, you make sure that the OKRs set at each level, those 3 to 5 in some way are contributing to the level above. And when I say make sure that they're aligned, it's not as if you just put them in a tool and that's the end of the day. There should be communication back and forth and negotiation. Is that the right commitment? There's a bit of challenging there in the process. Commitment, this is where everything is transparent and shared across the company. It shouldn't be a mystery what your colleagues in a different department are focused on for that time frame. Tracking, you are setting a clear cadence for how often your teams are meeting to talk about red, yellow, green. Are we on track, off track, or at risk? And then last I said stretch. Or should we set out to have almost impossible to hit targets, but really something we want to strive for? So those are some of the elements that you bake into your process. But the big thing is that every process is going to be different. So you're going to turn the knob on each of these based on where you are as an organization right now and what you're trying to drive at this moment.
There's a really good question in the Q&A that someone asked, if your organization has a lot of stuff that you want to improve or get done, or these dozens of objectives, how do you, and you have to choose just a few of these objectives to pursue, do you ever see that the OKRs get too broad in attempt to make to make up for the objectives that we're dropping? So maybe they can tuck them in under those other things?
Yeah, definitely. It's scope creep with your top company OKRs. Yeah, absolutely. You can just have these sort of meaningless umbrella objectives, and then you start tucking in key results that look like other objectives. So yeah, I always challenge in the workshop setting that we are not communicating anything because we're trying to cram it all in. What I would say is that conversation that you have in the room, if you say we have 12 objectives and we got to get down to 4, if it's at a department level or even at your top company level, super valuable. You'll know, hey, there actually is a hierarchy here. We thought 12 had to be done. 6 actually could wait if they had to, or if they all do need to get done, maybe what we're talking about here is the 7th objective. It's really like a project that's maybe a department needs to focus on this as their objective related to this company objective. So it can get ironed out, but there's like grappling with these OKRs, which is like 90% of the value, the grappling and the conversation in the room.
That's great. I've seen a lot of success before with OKRs when the team is engaged. And I keep thinking about that statistic that you shared about the lack of engagement in many organizations today, especially in the last few years since the world has changed a bunch. Somebody asked, how do you get your teams excited and on board with doing OKRs? Like, how do you get that level of engagement?
Yeah, a big part of when I work with an organization is step 1 is we talk about their why for talking about OKR. So even before focus and alignment, what are the negative signals they're getting from their people or their leaders that's like bringing them to the table with me? And a lot of times there's clear language that's already floating around the organization. Maybe it's from an engagement survey. Like there's like clear messages they've been getting, and having your leaders before any trainings are scheduled, before top company OKRs are announced, communicate that change is coming to solve those specific organizational pains that everyone's already aware of. It really helps. So it's always framed in this company and this moment in time, right? Saying, hey, I read this great book and Google has done amazing things with OKRs is a really weak message. It's way more powerful to say, we hear you loud and clear. We think we can get great at strategy execution and maybe solving this transparency issue that I complained about before.
Yeah, I like that. I think in the world of digital services, again, I hear a lot of agency owners or operators or people that are running these businesses say, man, my team keeps saying that they feel like they're burned out.
Yeah.
They feel they're having a hard time doing a great job, yet they're not maybe working much more than 40 hours. What do we do? It sounds like a great opportunity to put a why behind that.
Totally.
This new framework. That's cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I think the next section is talking about common KPIs and some OKR examples. And I think we want to do this mostly because we want to make sure that we distinguish between the two things. Again, like you said, we've got that dashboard, and I have some examples here on the next slide of what some 6 common KPIs for a digital service organization should be. And then we're going to say separately, like what some OKRs might be for a current digital service organization in this, maybe describing some of these changes they're looking for. So let's cut to the chase. Let's do it. Again, here's just 6 KPIs that I think are important. There's probably a dozen total that if I were running a services organization right now that I would have on my quarterly board deck and maybe my biweekly executive like dashboard. But these ones I think are the most important, especially when you're thinking about like annual performance, or if you're looking at like the trend line toward annual performance. And so the first one, fundamental, obviously revenue, gross margin, super basic. Those two are important, especially if you're thinking like, what is the current run rate of revenue? What are we projecting for the year? And what is the current run rate for gross margin? What are we projecting for the year? And that's where this revenue per billable employee and revenue per employee, I think more organizations need to look at this on a regular basis and again, monitor that trend over time. Revenue per employee, it's really helping us say, are we on the right track as far as how many people that we have in the organization versus we're paying salaries to versus how many hours we're billing or revenue that we're earning. This one in particular helps us balance out the billable to non-billable roles as we grow from 15 to 25 to 35 to 50 people all the way up to 500. One of the things I experienced growing Nerdery is that if you don't keep track of this ratio of revenue per employee, you could find yourself putting a lot of overhead positions in that make it really hard to hit your net income numbers over time. And its sister or cousin metric is revenue per billable employee. Again, this is something that you can benchmark no matter how you measure utilization or how you think about project margin. You can go up to any other agency that you work with and say, of the number of people that we have consistently billing in our project, that could be full-time or contract or whatever, how much revenue are we bringing in? And again, this provides a balanced view of that efficiency, no matter how you think about margin or utilization. This is a great one to trend. It should be going up and to the right, hopefully, definitely not going down. We're in trouble there. And then these utilization and project margin, these are great KPIs because they're easier to delegate. Your delivery team, the people who like lead individual people, maybe this is the head of development or the head of design or the whatever, that person, she should be looking at the utilization of her team. Are my people highly utilized? And then the balance of that project margin, this could be the head of project management, the project manager, the account manager, whatever. They might not have the same like responsibility for the people who do the work, but they're responsible for the projects and the accounts. They should be focused on margin on those projects and accounts. Those bottom two are again much closer to the front line. And so again, these are KPIs that we could put on our dashboard, and we should be looking at trends of those KPIs. We should be able to benchmark them against our industry peers. And if, for an example, some of these KPIs need to be improved, that's where OKRs come in. Reid?
Yeah, totally. And we look at these as crucial metrics you need to track for the health of the business. And in a setting where you have a board, this is like the type of stuff you report to the board and they care about. But like those health metrics just turned down, communicated to the whole organization, don't necessarily spark that energy and that shift to go and just change these, right? It's the translation of where we need to make the moves into those OKRs that paint the picture and then help everyone align and make the change. So the idea is if these are health metrics and it's like your cholesterol or some metric that you need to change, the shift would be around changing your diet or increasing exercise in a certain way. That's the job of converting these in a way, looking at the moment in time you're in and saying, how do we create a package of 3 to 4 company OKRs that will make the change we want to see? So just at a glance, I'm looking at revenue, crucial that we're tracking this. Maybe the change we can really communicate to our folks is let's focus on driving revenue from this type of customer where we've seen dramatic success, right? Mm-hmm. So like the revenue org can really start looking at media companies or whoever we want to target. And then with revenue per employee, maybe we want to focus on forecasting because we're thinking like, okay, let's get better upfront to see that we're going to keep everyone busy on time. Mm-hmm. Let's set an objective about getting better at forecasting early and often. So
I love that one in particular. I can remember an agency I worked with last year where I think there were about 25 people, and I think they had 7 people that were in leadership roles, and their net income was basically nothing. And I said, look, you're a little heavy right now. And we put together a very simple spreadsheet that said, let's make that revenue per employee number go up but how do you do that? You either move some of those overhead people back to billing, or you add more billable people that could create more revenue and then can offset that extra overhead that you've got. It was a pretty tough conversation we had because a lot of those people who are now in overhead roles had been with the agency for 15 years and matured into more VP level or director level roles. But the truth is the organization just couldn't afford to have that much leadership without enough revenue producing billable people. And so we found a good compromise on how we could grow the billable headcount over time. But in the meantime, move some of those overhead people into part-time billing. Anyway, to your point, like that's a change that we were able to make because we looked at the current performance of that KPI. We knew where we wanted it to be. And then we figured out how to implement an objective and some key results to move that to where we wanted to be over the course of 2 quarters.
Nice. Yeah. And it was that tough conversation, as you mentioned. It was tough, but that's what you had to grapple with. But then you can communicate the digestible form of the OKR to the organization and everyone can actually work towards it.
You got extremely smart people. And if you explain what the business problem is that we're trying to solve, they're all for helping design a solution and those objectives and key results, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally.
In the kind of to take it from key performance indicators to what is the change we're going to drive, I want to share this slide here that many of you have seen before. If you've worked with me, I like to show this off. It's a pretty simple benchmark of the different performance levels of a typical digital services organization. And so many of us start off in this heroic level where, again, we're really just focused on being awesome at the craft. We started this company because we wanted to do great work with great people and make big impact for our customers with the craft. And before we knew it, doing that great work, hiring smart people, our reputation built, the portfolio grew, like people started referring to us. We all of a sudden woke up one day and said, wow, we've got 20 people here that we're responsible for, and I got to run a business now. And so that they realized that they're feeling more reactive and opportunistic than planful and consistent and measured. And so a lot of us, we realized we have to start to build some level of operation, because if we want to perform in these KPIs like utilization, margin, or how fast we're innovating, we have to be more measured and consistent, right? The best of the best are in the strategic category where they have 85% utilization, 50% project margin, and they're actively their services. And so anybody on the call right now, I think you might want to look where you fit on this benchmark. A lot of people I talk to feel like they're stuck between these two. They fluctuate between 60 and 70% utilization. Margins can swing pretty high, and they're really not proactively building any new services or capabilities. But if you're in this stuck point here, and you're 15 to 50 person digital services organization, I came up with some super high level, I don't know, we'll let Reid be the judge of this. I came up with some OKR examples of a small organization taking on for the first time how they might write their 3 across the whole org. And maybe you could talk to whether or not they need to go any deeper than 3 as they start, or department level. But again, my idea was to be less opportunistic and less reactive and more proactive. I think that the first objective would be to ignite revenue growth by expanding our client base and elevating client success. And so I try to be pretty inspirational in this objective that we're trying to ignite this revenue growth. And I tried to say, maybe I could have been a little less inspirational and more practical to say, I think that you need to get new logos and you need to expand current customers, right? And so I think the easiest way to start, if you feel like you're not doing this consistently today, the easiest thing to do is build some new habits, like implementing a weekly sales and forecasting review meeting with the sales and the delivery team. So just once a week, we're talking about what is our pipeline of new business opportunity, whether that's coming from existing accounts or new logos, and how does that compare to our capacity that we have and our goals for revenue. The second one would be to implement a QBR process to empower the people who lead accounts to take some responsibility for retention and expansion. And what that means, if you're not familiar with QBR, that's a quarterly business review. When we did this at Nerdery, when we created a QBR process and we did bottoms up budgeting for revenue on existing accounts, we asked those account leaders, we don't want to tell you what you think you can get out of your existing relationships to extend a project or sell an expansion project. You tell us, like, how much revenue could we expect over the next 4 quarters from your key account? That was amazing change in the way that we ran our business. Just building that process alone, building that new habit, starting to develop those muscles. I think for the first quarter, that's where I'd start. Maybe the second quarter is how we improve the efficacy of the process. Maybe we give them more specific growth numbers. But then that third key result is a little bit more measurable. I think that the first 2 could help us work towards the third, which I think is low by industry standard. I think 300% is like what I would say my target would be. But just to say, let's increase the pipeline to show at least 200% of what your quarterly revenue target is in qualified leads. That could come from new business or existing business, but just, again, providing visibility to that, looking at that at a regular basis, and kind of setting a goal that is, in this case, it's a bit of a leading goal because it's just, are we getting enough pipeline in there? Maybe not as much as some other leading goals, but I thought that was a pretty simple way to start to do the revenue growth. Any thoughts or feedback on that?
Well, I'll say, just for sake of time, I think great job with the inspirational statement. And then I do the sort of like leading key results and lagging as outcome key results as well. A big thing I'll say with this too, Tom, is like one thing you'll get better at with OKRs is as long as it's something like the language is something your company responds to, it's written well. It doesn't have to be like copy paste these great verbs that you've used. It's just know the language your company uses and tap into it.
Love it.
To inspire.
So we'll share this out. I realize we're out of time. I guess I wasn't watching the time.
We're good. Yeah, I don't know how you want to use the last minute. I have some tips for effective implementation, but we could also open it to Q&A if people like.
Why don't we do that? We'll leave your slide up for implementation and see if there's any questions here. I don't see any questions coming in, so maybe you could just walk us through this.
Yeah. Let me share this for you all as you're, winding down on the call. But big thing, implementation of OKRs, it's a big cultural change, but something that I've worked on over the years as I've helped organizations is really simplify that process and make it approachable. If I were to give you four points for success, appoint a team that's going to own this process time over time. It's not an implementation team. It's your OKR team that runs in perpetuity and make sure that these habits are ingrained. Second, design your program. Like I said, every OKR program is different. It's going to change over time. Make sure you choose those elements of the OKRs that are going to serve you now and communicate those clearly. And then start with your executives. Make sure they understand what's important about this process, that they write really high quality company OKRs to share. And then just communicate, educate, spend the time training your folks, but not to the point that you're stressing them out. Just go. There's no such thing as a perfect plan. So a good enough plan executed is going to be way more powerful. So those are some high level things to think about. But if you're interested in learning more, feel free to reach out. And it really can be simple, even though it's a big cultural shift. And Tom, I know you and Miranda talked about you're still learning and still getting better at it.
That's right. It was a real pleasure. I'm sorry we ran out of time there at the end. If I would encourage any of you guys to reach out to Reid if you want to learn more about how to implement OKRs. We've included his website here. We've learned a lot working with Reid, and I know you guys will too. And as always, we would love to talk to you more about how you can forecast and resource plan and use Parallax to do that.